welcome back to Jot's Shop.
In this video, we'll just be doing some nits and nats before we actually start rebuilding the F100. If you're new here, take a second and hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. This really helps our channel get additional viewers and support. The initial plan was to send the rolling frame off to the sandblasters. However, we found that was logistically impossible. It was going to be very expensive and we would have to rent a trailer to even get it to the sandblasters. So we decided to just use a wire wheel to remove most of the rust and then use a good rust sealer and finish coating on the frame. To make the cleaning easier, we removed the rest of the gas lines, the brake lines, the shocks, and other things that could come off. The engine mounts came off easily, as did the brake lines and the gas line. This video will help us remember where everything was. We also removed the various leaf spring bumpers. The rear parking brake cable on the driver's side is attached to the frame using a special bracket. On the passenger side, the cable is just on a metal bracket attached to the frame. The front shocks are held on by bolts and spacers at the top and bottom. They were relatively easy to remove. The rear shocks were a bit more challenging. After removing the lock nut at the top, the main nut required a bit of a contraption to remove it. Once the top nut was removed, the bottom nut came off fairly easily, as did the rest of the shock. Once we had all the shocks off, our plan was to move it outside and take the rest of the Texas dirt off with a pressure washer. We had to wait a while since we had a late spring snowstorm who moved through. After pressure washing and allowing the sun to dry it completely, it was time to use a wire wheel on the frame. However, after about a half hour of bending over and running the grinder, My back yelled halt. It's time for a different plan. So we decided to remove the rest of the suspension and raise the frame to waist height to minimize bending over. Before removing the leaf springs, we measured them to make sure we got the correct replacements. The front springs were 2 inches wide and about 23 inches from each bolt to the middle of the leaf spring. We weren't sure if we were able to source the front shackle or the bolts, so we wanted to take everything off without destroying anything. However, we immediately snapped one of the bolts for the front leaf springs. Moving to the rear, we found the rear leaf springs were 2 1/4 inches wide and 24 inches to the front and 28 inches to the rear. The front and rear shackle brackets were in good shape, so we wanted to be careful as we took things off. With some persuasion, we got the nut off the front bolt. However, the bolt refused to budge, so we just gave up and cut it off. The rear shackles were pretty rusted, but we managed to get them all off. With all the leaf spring bolts either out or cut off, we're ready to lift the frame off the suspension. We have finally had all the axles off the frame. We moved the frame out of the way, and now we're ready to cut off the leaf springs from each of the axles. We used jack stands to hold up both the leaf springs and the axles, and then cut off the U-bolts. Remember that there is some tension in the leaf springs, so cut carefully. We'll be reusing the shock mounts, so we removed them to clean them up. The lift made it easy to put the front axle onto a cart and get it ready for cleaning and repair. The rear axle is obviously heavier, so I brought in the boss to help me out. Again, we raised it using the lift, took off the wheels, and then put the whole thing on jack stands. We carefully cut off the U-bolts. The boss's grandfather had used the truck to haul cattle in the bed, so it had a very heavy-duty set of leaf springs. We're going to a lighter set of springs, so we're replacing these 11 springs with only 7. The rear axle's now ready for cleaning. Since we're going to start the cleaning on the frame from the bottom, we flip the frame over. This brought the frame to waist high to make it easier to work on. You'll notice we ended up using our truck bed dolly for the frame. So now it's a frame and truck bed dolly. So now we're finally ready to start rebuilding. We'll clean up the frame and then use the Master Coat system to protect and paint it. Then we'll replace the old suspension parts with new ones. And also replace the old broken leaf springs. We hope you enjoyed our video. It would really help us out if you press that like button. Also, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and press that notification bell. Thanks for watching. Remember that all comments and our suggestions are always welcome.
That's all, folks, and thanks for watching. There's more videos to come on the truck. Bye-bye.